Now, recently, Greg Paltrinieri just hit the second fastest time ever in the 1500 freestyle in a time of 14:33.1. Now, in this video, I want to have a look at his technique and show you how unique his technique is compared to what you would picture someone who is swimming at that sort of speed. Now, it's very unique for the fact of he has a bit of a crossover. He has this loping sort of freestyle, a very fast stroke rate, and it doesn't really fit into the mold of what you would think the highest level long distance swimmer would be like. And that's one of the things that I try to teach on this channel is you don't need to fit into this one mold of how to swim. There are so many different styles, and it really depends on the individual. Depends on you, your height, your wingspan, your experience, the type of events you're doing. So there's no point really trying to fit into this one idea of how you should swim. And I remember when I was growing up, I would look at videos of Alexander Popov and I'd try and swim like him. He was a 50 and really 100-meter swimmer. And that sort of style just didn't suit me. And I tried it for a couple of months, but I just couldn't get it to stick. And then I would also look at videos of Ian Thorpe and try and swim exactly the same. But again, I just wasn't that tall. I didn't have that bigger wingspan, and that sort of style just didn't suit me. And it wasn't until I started to get an understanding of the type of stroke that I would need to be able to sustain speed for 1500 meters up to sort of 5Ks, that sort of distance. It wasn't until I tried to just go with what felt best and go with the type of technique that would suit me individually that I really started to get better. And so that's what I want to show you here is there are some things in this stroke that you might be able to take on board for your own swimming, particularly if you're racing open water, whether you're a triathlete or an open water swimmer. There are some really good things in this sort of stroke that can be great for that style of swimming, especially if you wear a wetsuit. Now, the reason for that is Greg's got a very, very high sort of stroke, as in he sits very high in the water compared to someone, if you look at like Ian Thorpe, who tended to swim quite low in the water. So there are some really different sorts of styles there. Let's have a look at the video here. Now, this is some footage from that race where he went 14:33. Now, I've got some underwater footage as well because I wanted to be able to show you this. This is footage from a different race, but underwater, look, it's probably not going to have changed too much compared to how he's swimming now, but I just want to show you how different his stroke is. Now, if we have a look through here, one of the things that you will notice here is that when we look from the front view, one of the most notable things is that he's not really that symmetrical. He's not necessarily swimming on the train tracks, as we say. So when we look at this front view, which we've got here, you'll notice that this right arm comes across quite a bit. So the right hand recovers, enters there, and it comes into the center quite a bit. And then as he goes through this next phase, which is the catch and the pull, you'll see that the hand comes pretty well under the body there. That is very different than what we see. Now, if I just cut to an underwater shot at a different race here, you'll even see it here. So you see this right hand comes in, crosses the center a little bit. So it kind of comes into the center, then it comes out, and then he starts the catch, and just see what happens next. So nice catch here. Now, this is a great catch position in terms of where that arm is. All right, so we do see the hand a little bit wider than the shoulder as he's just about to pass underneath it. Now, that's what we want. That's when you'll be set into your lats very nicely. But the next thing you'll see has a big sort of in-sweep from there to there, where the hand comes very close to crossing that center line. And in the right view, you can actually see it sometimes does cross that center line. Now, that's not to say go and do that, because there's very few swimmers that I've seen and worked with that they'd want to be coming under the center line. But you can just see how there are some differences depending on the person where, it's not a one size fits all. So he has this big in sweep, but a good way to sort of think of his stroke is it's almost like a gallop. So in terms of a gallop, it's almost like this position here where he's got his left hand reaching forward and he's taking a breath. This is where he's longest in the stroke. You can see that nice reach and extension all the way through the body, and he's sort of longest through there. And then he gets a really good connection from this catch and pull to the rotation of his hips and the rest of the body. So you see here that the left hand, right, is getting the catch. This left foot kicks downwards, and it's that connection there. So the catch and the downwards kick are happening together, and that sort of almost kind of sends this energy through the body, through the hips and through the torso, where he gets this really good connection, gets that cross connection through the body there. And that allows him to get a really good hold of the water and allows him to get quite a bit of distance on that stroke. And then it's almost like he's on his right side. So this one here, this is almost like his launching stroke where he gets a hold of the water and he throws himself over the top there. So I'll just play it in normal speed for you. And actually, I might just cut above so you can just sort of see it's this stroke here. The right hand comes in and then he sort of launches himself over the top. Now, in terms of the difference between his recovery and entry on the different sides, so this left arm recovers quite wide, it hardly clears the water. It's still a good recovery, but it's very low to the water. And then as he goes to enter, look, he just gets his fingertips in first, but almost at the same time that elbow comes in. So it's almost like this, almost like an overreach. Now, if you've seen these videos, you know that we like to recommend fingers in first with the elbows slightly up. But this is a technique that we often see, well, not often, but we sometimes see with elite swimmers is they'll almost sort of throw their arm and shoulder forwards in this almost kind of loping type of freestyle. But you can still see the fingertips are angling in at the same time that elbow lands. Now, again, you may not necessarily want to do that in your stroke because for the majority of people out there, they're going to be better off getting the fingertips in first. But for this galloping type of stroke, it is a reasonably common type of way to recover and enter in the water. And then on this right-hand side, you'll see he gets a slightly higher recovery. So the underarm is out of the water a little bit more. The elbow, the arm's up a little bit higher as well. And on that hand, he enters fingertips first, elbow up, and that leaves him a little bit more room to then slide the hand forwards there. So if we look at that from a slightly different angle, which we will see here, you'll notice, all right, that's the slightly higher recovery. That's the right one. Then this left one sort of swings around quite wide. And that's why I think we see a bit of that crossover is because that one does swing around so much. Now, if you're a coach looking at this or a swimmer and you'd say, well, wouldn't he be better off, having this much more symmetrical, have the left one like the right one? But there's nothing wrong with an uneven stroke. And by uneven, I mean wider recovery here, higher recovery there, and a pull that's not quite symmetrical. So, for one hand to maybe go a little bit wider or a little bit more under the body like you can see here. That's a really valid way to swim. So even though there are some sort of things that most people should aim for, there are some differences in the stroke. Now, if we just sort of cut to a different shot here, one of the things you'll notice is what he does really well with his breathing is his timing of it. So he's got a stroke rate of around 90 strokes a minute. So that's very, very quick. And I'd say 99% of people couldn't maintain that sort of stroke rate for more than probably 100 meters, if that. It's a very high cadence, very high stroke rate. But in order to get it, he's breathing every second stroke. So that's breathing pretty regularly. Now, one of the ways that he's able to get that breath very quickly is he's got great timing of his breath. So he comes over the top here. As that hand's entering the water, or hasn't even entered yet, his head is turning to the side, gets the breath here, gets it quickly, and then straight away brings the head back to the center. So he's getting that breath very quickly. And one of the things that we see, whether it's in the Feedback Friday videos that I do on here, or if it's at clinics or with members who send in their videos, is the timing of the breath can really throw out the stroke. And one of the most common ones that I see is a breath that's taken too late, or it lags off to the side for too long. So if you're coming over the top here, and that left hand enters the water, and then you turn the head, and this arm's coming through, and this right hand, let's say this right hand was going to enter, and your head is still off to the side, it's too late. You're going to really lose the timing of the stroke, and your head's going to be off to the side for too long. So what he does really well there is he turns the head along with that shoulder and that arm coming through. So he gets the breath very quickly. And that can be a good lesson to learn for a lot of people, because if your timing of the breath, or you're turning too far to breathe, often it's issues with breathing that will throw people out. And so sometimes we'll get people to swim with a snorkel if we're trying to change something in the stroke. Swim with a snorkel, so you've taken that element of turning the head to the side out of it, and then you can work on the catch and the pull a lot easier. So that can be a really valid way to do that. Now in this footage here, this is from a different race. This is from an 800 freestyle that he did a couple of years back. if you have a look at his kick, and I've touched on this in another video before, but if you have a look at his kick, it is very, very unique. There is a big crossover on both sides. So a crossover kick is essentially this here, which is pretty obvious when you slow it down. It's when one foot crosses over the other foot. So it's a crossover with the feet out the back. And you might have heard me talk about this. I was chatting with Eni Jones, who's a coach who I've learned a lot from. She was talking about Trent Grimsey, who has a world record for the English Channel swim. And he used the crossover kick, which is a really efficient way to swim. But before kind of learning about this many years ago, I thought you should never have a crossover kick. We've been taught you should have a consistent 6-beat kick, but that's not necessarily the best way to swim for everyone, because you can see here with Greg that he's got this crossover kick on both sides. So a big crossover here and a big crossover on the other side as well, which we see on that stroke there, which we would have just missed. Now, with that crossover kick, again, I'm not saying you should do this, but it is certainly a valid way to save the legs. And I think part of the reason why this type of kick can be really effective, and you see this with a lot of good distance swimmers, is because it allows you to basically save your legs because you're not kicking hard at all, and it does allow most of these swimmers to get great connection through the hips. So it's kind of like they get this swivel through their hips, and then it just allows them to get their stroke rate up a little bit higher, but save their legs at the same time. Whereas if he's got a 6-beat kick and he's working it hard, it is a much more tiring way to swim. Whereas if you can just reserve the legs, then you can typically go at maintain a quicker pace for longer with saving the legs. So again, it's an individual thing, but it's quite interesting there. Now, one thing that if you looked at this position right here, actually like that position there, and you looked at the feet, just a still shot, you'd go, oh, geez, that is way, way off anything that someone should do. But when you sort of slow it down, you do look at swimmers who are quite unique, like Greg here, like Janet Evans. If you saw our Strange Strokes video, which I'll link to above, then there are some really different ways to swim. So that is another thing that I just wanted to point out. Now, in terms of how do you develop this sort of galloping stroke? Well, there's a few different ways. One really good way that's pretty simple would be to put some fins on, swim freestyle, and do dolphin kick instead of a freestyle kick. So with each stroke that you take a dolphin kick with each stroke that you take. Now that's going to give you this really good connection through the hips, like you can see here. And it's going to teach you that sort of connection through the body and that cross connection through the body, and being able to use your hips to connect up with your catch. Because look, it's a difficult thing to, I think, teach and to develop. It certainly takes time, but that can be a really good drill to help sort of bring that connection together. So that's something that I would recommend there. Now, the other thing that I haven't sort of spoken about here with his 1500 that went 14, where he went 14:33, was the pacing. So one of the things that you see with someone like Katie Ledecky or Paltrinieri is that their pacing is so good. So for him, every single lap, apart from the first lap and the last 2 laps, he did 40 strokes for each lap, maintaining a stroke rate of 90 strokes a minute. And he hit that consistently for every single lap, apart from the first and the last 2. Now, that just meant that his pace was pretty much exactly the same the whole way through. And it wasn't until the last 100 where he picked it up and he went a little bit quicker than the previous couple of laps. So in terms of long distance events, you're much better off trying to maintain the same, almost exact same pace throughout the race. And just the last little bit, you probably want to pick it up. But you see that across the board with all elite swimmers, is that sort of pacing. Now, there's a good example of this would be, like, for example, if you look at Jared Port in the 2016 10K swim, he broke ahead, and I think he was leading for about 9Ks of this 10K race, and he ended up, I can't remember what he placed, but it wasn't I don't think it was in the top 10. So he basically went out pretty hard, broke away from the pack, was on his own for 9Ks, and then the group finally caught him. And I think it's a pretty good example of just being able to maintain the same pace. You'll typically be able to swim faster than if you, say, have a really fast start and then you sort of try and maintain it or try and back off it a little bit. Like, you're much better off just being consistent if you're doing any sort of long distance swimming. So if you are training for like Ironman or those sorts of events, that's probably the right way to pace it.